They laughed before the appetizers even arrived, not loudly, not openly, but just enough for me to understand my place at that table. It happened the moment I stepped into the restaurant. The lighting was soft, expensive, designed to flatter people who already felt important. Crystal glasses, linen napkins, servers who spoke in lowered voices as if the room itself required reverence. I paused at the entrance, not because I was intimidated, because I was observing. That is something people mistake about quiet women. They assume silence means confusion. It rarely does. My daughter-in-law's mother was the first to see me. Her eyes traveled slowly from my shoes to my handbag to the simple coat I had chosen deliberately for that evening. She smiled, but it was not a welcoming smile. It was an assessment. "You must be her," she said, just like that. Not my name, not a greeting, just identification. I nodded. "Yes," I said, "I'm her mother-in-law." She extended her hand lightly, as if touching something fragile. "We've heard so much about you," she replied. That sentence is rarely good. I noticed how she glanced briefly at her husband before saying it, a look shared, a judgment confirmed. Behind her stood my daughter-in-law, polished and radiant in a way that suggested rehearsal. She hugged me quickly, too quickly. "I'm so glad you came," she said. The emphasis was on came, as if attendance were optional, as if my presence required gratitude. My son kissed my cheek. He looked nervous, not embarrassed, just aware that two worlds were about to sit at the same table. Inside, the dining room shimmered with wealth that did not try to hide itself. Wall art that cost more than some houses, wine already opened before guests arrived, the kind of place where people order without asking the price. I let them lead me to the table. It was round, 5 seats. I was placed directly across from her parents, strategic. The waiter pulled my chair out politely. I thanked him. I noticed the glance he gave my coat again. Simple fabric. No visible labels, no glitter, just clean, classic, intentional. Menus were distributed. Before anyone spoke to me, her father leaned back and said, "So tell us, what do you do?" There it was, the evaluation question. I folded my hands gently on the table. "I manage things," I said. "What kind of things?" he pressed. "Assets," I replied. He laughed lightly. "That must keep you busy." "It does," I said. My daughter-in-law jumped in quickly. "She keeps very simple these days," she said, "very low-key." Low-key. I noticed that word. Her mother tilted her head. "That's refreshing," she said. "We value ambition in our family." There was that smile again, measured, contained, and underneath it, something sharper. The appetizers arrived. No one asked what I preferred. They ordered for the table, assumed. I let them, because sometimes the fastest way to understand people is to give them space to reveal themselves. Conversation drifted toward travel, investments, property in different countries, exclusive schools, private clubs. They spoke fluently in status. My son contributed cautiously. My daughter-in-law performed effortlessly. And then it happened. Her mother looked directly at me and said, "It must have been difficult raising him without certain advantages." She did not say money. She did not need to. I held her gaze. "He had everything he needed," I replied. She smiled again. "Love is important, but exposure matters too." Exposure. I let the word hang. They had already decided who I was, just a poor mother, just a simple woman, just someone who did her best with much to work with. I noticed something else then. They were comfortable, too comfortable, the kind of comfort that only exists when people believe there are no consequences. My daughter-in-law leaned closer to her mother and whispered something. They both laughed, softly, contained, but not hidden. I did not react, because this dinner was not about me defending myself. It was about observing who they were when they thought I did not matter. The waiter returned with wine. Her father chose the most expensive bottle without consulting anyone. "Celebration," he said, "for the joining of families." He looked at me when he said it, as if measuring whether I understood what that meant. Joining, assimilating, elevating. I took the glass when it was handed to me. "Thank you," I said calmly. Her mother finally asked, "So where do you live?" "In the house my husband built," I replied. "Oh, how quaint," she said. Quaint, that word again, another label, another quiet assumption. I realized then that this dinner was not accidental. It was an assessment. They were determining the value of the family their daughter was marrying, and they had already decided the scale. What they did not know was this: the house my husband built sat on land most of their properties rented from. The assets I managed included the company her father had recently tried to acquire. The investments they discussed casually at this table ran through trusts under my name. But I did not interrupt them. I did not correct them. I did not reveal anything, because power that announces itself too early loses impact. Instead, I let them continue. Her father leaned forward again. "I assume you'll be comfortable letting the young people handle larger decisions now." "Such as?" I asked. "Well, finances, business direction, expansion plans. It's a different world today." He meant theirs. I smiled softly. "Yes," I said, "it is." And that was when her mother laughed again, just a little louder this time. "It must be nice to finally have someone ambitious in the family," she said to my son. He froze. I did not. I took a slow sip of wine. I acted exactly as they expected, humble, quiet, uninformed, just a poor mother at a table she did not belong at. They thought they were welcoming me into their world. They did not realize they were already sitting inside mine. And that was the invitation. Not dinner, not the restaurant. The invitation to underestimate me. They had no idea what that would cost them by the end of the night, and I had not even unfolded the napkin yet. The real performance did not begin when we sat down. It began when they realized I would not interrupt them. There is something unsettling about a woman who does not rush to prove herself. It makes people speak longer than they should, louder than they intend, more honestly than they planned. The first course arrived, plated like art, tiny portions arranged with unnecessary confidence. Her father examined it before taking a bite, as if judging a transaction. "So," he casually said, "what was your background before managing assets?" The pause before the last two words was deliberate. Before whatever you married into, he meant. Before whatever elevated you. I dabbed my napkin lightly at the edge of my mouth. "I built quietly," I replied. He chuckled. "What built what?" "Stability," I replied. Her mother leaned back. "That's admirable," she said. "Security is important for women of your generation." Your generation. It sounded like a diagnosis. My daughter-in-law reached for her water. "Mom," she murmured lightly, as if pretending to smooth things over. But she did not correct her. She did not defend me. She simply let it linger. And that told me more than anything else that evening. My son tried to redirect. "We've been looking at expanding the company overseas," he said, "exploring new markets." Her father's interest sharpened immediately. "Ah, yes, I heard about that. Bold move. Risky, though, without strong capital backing." He looked at me again. "Unless, of course, there are hidden investors." Hidden. I let the word breathe. "Capital backing is rarely about noise," I said calmly. "It is about timing." He smiled thinly. "Timing requires courage." "No," I corrected gently. "Timing requires patience." That was the first moment he stopped smiling, because patience implies longevity, and longevity implies power. The second course arrived. Conversation shifted toward properties. "We just closed on a villa in Monaco," her mother announced lightly. "It's important to diversify globally." "Diversification is wise," I said. "Do you invest internationally too?" she asked, almost amused. "Yes," I replied. "In what capacity?" she pressed. "Ownership." She blinked. Her husband laughed. "Direct ownership? That's rare." "Not if you start early," I said. There was silence for a fraction too long. My daughter-in-law cleared her throat. "She's always been very frugal," she explained quickly. "Very conservative." Frugal, conservative. Those were the labels she needed them to hold on to. If they believed I was modest, small, cautious, they would feel comfortable. If they believed I was expansive, strategic, deliberate, they would feel threatened. So she chose the safer narrative. I let her. because sometimes the truth does not need defense, it needs exposure. Her father lifted his wine again. "Well, whatever works," he said, "though in today's economy, scale is everything." "The scale is only impressive if it's sustainable," I replied. He set his glass down harder than necessary. Her mother decided to try a different approach. "So tell us," she said sweetly, "what are your expectations for the wedding?" Ah, there it was. Money, contribution, position. "Whatever the couple decides," I said. "That's generous of you, but surely you have boundaries." Boundaries, as if I were negotiating from limitation. My son shifted in his seat. "We haven't discussed finances yet," he admitted. Her father looked at him sharply. "You should. Transparency prevents misunderstandings." He glanced at me again when he said it, as if warning me not to overstep. I rested my hands calmly on the table. "Transparency also prevents assumptions," I said. Her mother smiled tightly. "Assumptions can be dangerous." "Yes," I agreed, "especially when they are made too confidently." The waiter approached with the main course. Tension softened briefly as plates were set down. Then her father asked the question he had been circling all night. "If something were to happen tomorrow," he said, "what would your son inherit?" Direct, unfiltered. The air changed. My daughter-in-law froze. My son looked at me uncertain. I did not flinch. "Security," I said. "That's not an answer," her father replied. "It is the only one that matters." He leaned forward. "Forgive me, but clarity is important when families merge." "Families do not merge, they align." Her mother tilted her head. "And alignment requires equal footing." "Exactly," I replied. Silence settled, this time heavier. They were trying to measure my weight in the room, to determine whether I was an asset or an obstacle. And because I was not reacting defensively, they grew bolder. Her mother sighed softly. "We simply want to ensure our daughter is protected." "Protected from what?" I asked gently. "From instability." There it was again, the narrative, the assumption that I represented limitation, that my son had risen above something modest, that she was marrying down into humility. I met her gaze fully. She is protected, and so is he. Her father smirked. "That confidence is admirable." "It is not confidence," I replied. "It is documentation." He blinked. "Documentation?" he repeated. "Yes." The word sat between us like a sealed envelope. My daughter-in-law's smile faltered. "Because documentation cannot be dismissed with tone. It cannot be laughed at. It cannot be rephrased. It exists." The dessert arrived. No one touched it immediately. My son finally spoke. "Mom," he said gently, "maybe we should talk specifics soon." "We will," I replied. Her father leaned back again, studying me. "I must say," he said slowly, "you carry yourself differently than I expected." I smiled. "Most people do." Her mother laughed lightly, trying to recover the atmosphere. "Well, appearances can be deceiving." "Yes," I agreed calmly. "They often are." The dinner table had shifted, subtly. They were no longer certain who they were evaluating, because I had not defended myself. I had not revealed anything. I had simply refused to shrink. And when someone refuses to shrink in a room built on hierarchy, the structure begins to wobble. They thought I was just a poor mother, just simple, just quiet. They did not understand that quiet is often a strategy, and the dinner table was no longer a stage for their superiority. It had become a mirror, and they were just beginning to see their own reflection. Mockery never starts loud. It starts playful, polite, dressed as humor. By the time dessert plates were cleared, the air at the table had shifted from evaluation to entertainment, and I had become the entertainment. Her mother leaned forward, resting her chin lightly on her hand. "You must find all of this a bit overwhelming," she said sweetly, gesturing to the chandelier above us, the polished silver, the view of the city skyline behind glass. "It's a beautiful restaurant," I replied. "Yes," she smiled, "it's where we usually host important conversations." Important, as if tonight were a negotiation. Her father added, "We prefer places that reflect our standards." Standards. I nodded. Standards matter. He watched me carefully. "I'm sure you're more used to something simpler," he continued casually. "Comfort food, smaller venues." There it was, a gentle downgrade. My son shifted in his seat again. "Dad," he started. "It's fine," I said calmly. I turned back to her father. "I enjoy simplicity," I said. "It leaves room for substance." Her mother laughed softly. "Oh, that's charming." Charming, not strategic, not deliberate. Charming. My daughter-in-law joined in this time. "She's always been very modest," she said lightly, "very grounded." Grounded, another word for small. Her father raised his glass again. "There's nothing wrong with modest beginnings." Beginnings, as if I were still in one. I folded my hands neatly in my lap. "I agree," I said. They waited for insecurity, for defense, for explanation. None came, so the mockery sharpened. Her mother turned to my son. "When you visit her, do you still stay in your old neighborhood?" she asked sweetly. "Yes," he said slowly. "Oh, how quaint," she replied. Quaint, a word that turns real lives into scenery. I watched her carefully. She thought she was elevating herself, but elevation built on comparison always reveals insecurity. Her father leaned in again. "You know, in our circles, perception matters, background matters, presentation matters." "Of course," I replied. "And yours is—" He paused, choosing the word carefully. "Understated." Understated. I smiled. "Understatement has advantages." "Like what?" he asked. "Longevity," I answered. He did not expect that. Mockery relies on imbalance. It requires one person to feel higher. The moment the target stands steady, the joke begins to wobble. Her mother tried again. "We were surprised when our daughter told us about your portfolio." "Portfolio?" "Yes," she said, almost laughing. "She described it as very conservative." I glanced at my daughter-in-law. "Did she?" I asked gently. She shifted. "Well, yes, you've always preferred stability over risk." "Stability is not the opposite of growth. It is the foundation of it." Her father smirked. "In our experience, real growth requires boldness." "Boldness without infrastructure is gambling," I said calmly. There was a pause. Then he smiled again. "You speak like someone who reads about markets," he said. "I speak like someone who built in them," I replied. The temperature at the table dropped slightly. He studied me longer now, as if recalibrating. Mockery becomes dangerous when it hits something solid. Her mother clapped her hands lightly. Well, I suppose every family has its strengths. Her eyes scanned my dress. Simple, neutral, deliberately unremarkable. She mistook restraint for lack. I noticed. My daughter-in-law leaned towards her. "Mom," she whispered lightly, but the whisper carried. Her mother waved it off. "Oh, we're just teasing." Teasing. I nodded slowly. "Teasing requires shared humor," I said. For a moment, no one moved. Then her father chuckled. "You're quite sharp." I did not smile. "Only when necessary," I replied. "Mockery works best when the other person wants approval." I did not. That unsettled them more than offense would have. Her father decided to test something larger. "So tell me," he said casually, "what was your biggest financial win?" There it was, the trap. If I answered small, they would confirm their assumptions. If I answered loudly, they would demand proof. If I avoided it, they would call it insecurity. I took a sip of water. "Timing matters more than wins," I said. He tilted his head. "Avoiding the question?" "No," I replied, "protecting it." Her mother laughed louder this time. "Protecting what?" "Leverage," I said. The word hung in the air. My daughter-in-law's posture stiffened. Leverage implies scale. It implies influence. It implies options. Her father's tone shifted almost imperceptibly. "And what leverage do you believe you hold?" "The kind that doesn't need to announce itself," I answered. Silence. Mockery thrives in noise. Silence suffocates it. He leaned back slowly. "Interesting," he said. "Yes," I agreed. The conversation moved after that, but something had cracked. They no longer laughed as easily. Their glances were shorter, their confidence slightly thinner. Mockery had been their tool to reduce me. Instead, it had revealed their need to measure me, and measurement is the first step towards fear. When the check arrived, her father reached for it instantly. "Allow me," he said. "Of course," I replied. He looked almost disappointed that I did not protest. Power games require participation. I declined to play. As we stood to leave, her mother touched my arm lightly. "You've handled tonight very gracefully," she said. "Grace is easier when you are not threatened," I replied. Her hand withdrew. My daughter-in-law avoided my eyes as we walked out. My son stayed unusually quiet. The valet brought the car. City lights reflected in polished glass. Her father shook my hand firmly. "We'll have many more conversations," he said. "I'm sure we will," I replied. And this time his smile did not reach his eyes, because the mockery had failed. They had tried to reduce me to a role, just a poor mother, just a background figure, just a modest beginning. What they had discovered instead was composure, and composure, when misunderstood, becomes dangerous. They thought they were evaluating my worth. They did not realize they had exposed their own. And the evening was far from over, because mockery is only comfortable when you believe you are safe. They were no longer certain they were. Assumptions are louder than insults. Insults try to wound. Assumptions try to define. The moment we stepped out of the restaurant, I could feel it. They had already decided who I was. They just hadn't realized they were wrong yet. The valet opened the door for me first, a small courtesy, but I noticed the hesitation in her father's eyes. He had expected me to move slower, to fumble, to appear grateful for proximity to luxury. Instead, I moved as if I had stood in places like this many times before, because I had. Her mother kissed her daughter on the cheek. "Call me tomorrow," she said. "We need to discuss next steps." Next steps. Not wedding details, not family plans, strategy. My daughter-in-law nodded. Her eyes flicked toward me for a fraction of a second, assessing. The car ride home was quiet. My son kept both hands tight on the steering wheel. "You didn't have to let them talk like that," he finally said. "Like what?" I asked. "Like you were—" He paused. "Less. Less. Interesting words. I didn't feel less," I replied calmly. He glanced at me. "They assumed a lot." "Yes," I said, "and you let them." I turned slightly in my seat. "Did you want me to correct them?" He hesitated. "I don't know," he admitted. That honesty mattered, because what he was really asking was this: why didn't you defend yourself? I looked out the window at passing lights. "Defense implies insecurity," I said. "I had none." He was quiet again. "Assumptions only work when the target confirms them. I had confirmed nothing." The next morning, my daughter-in-law called him. I could hear her voice from across the room, lower than usual, focused. I caught fragments: background, assets, long-term, image. When he hung up, he looked unsettled. "They want to move quickly," he said. "Move what quickly?" I asked. "The engagement announcement, the venue deposit, the joint accounts." Joint accounts. That was fast. "Her father believes in momentum," he added. "Momentum benefits whoever is steering," I replied. He looked at me. "Do you think they don't trust us?" "Trust is built on transparency," I said. "Did you notice they asked about my portfolio before asking about our values?" He didn't answer, because he had noticed. Later that afternoon, I received a message, not from her mother. It was polite, almost sweet. "We enjoyed meeting you. We'd love to understand more about your financial philosophy. It's important that families align." Align. Alignment suggests hierarchy. I read it twice. Then I responded. "I believe in ownership clarity," I wrote, "especially when it comes to long-term stability." She replied quickly, "Of course, transparency is everything." I smiled faintly. Transparency is rarely requested by people who offer it. It is requested by people who want access. The assumptions continued quietly over the next few days. Her father sent my son articles about aggressive investment growth. Her mother asked subtle questions about inheritance structures. My daughter-in-law mentioned how modern couples should consolidate assets for simplicity. Simplicity. The same word people use before moving something out of your name. One evening, my son sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Do you think they see us as unequal?" he asked. "Us," I said gently, "or me." He looked down. "You." There it was. "They think you don't have much leverage," he admitted. Leverage, the same word I had used at dinner. I leaned back in my chair. "And what do you think?" I asked. He hesitated. "I think they assume you're comfortable but small." Small. I let the silence stretch. Then I asked him something simple. "Do you know who holds the deed to this house?" He blinked. "You do," he said. "Do you know how many properties are tied to that deed?" His forehead creased slightly. "No." "Do you know how many of your early business losses were quietly covered without explanation?" His eyes lifted. "You said you had savings," he replied. "I do." He is studying me now. "Mom, what are you saying?" I folded my hands calmly. "I'm saying assumptions are dangerous when they are made about the wrong person." He went very still. "You never talk about money," he said slowly. "That is because money should work quietly," I replied. Silence settled in the room. For the first time since dinner, I saw doubt shift. No doubt in me, doubt in the narrative he had absorbed. That night, I received another message, this time from my daughter-in-law. We should probably clarify expectations before merging anything significant. Merging. I read the sentence carefully. Expectations are best clarified before assumptions become requests, I replied. She did not respond immediately, because now something has shifted. They had assumed I was simply a modest mother. They had assumed I would be grateful to attach myself to their momentum. They had assumed their scale exceeded mine. But assumptions crumble the moment numbers enter the room, and numbers were coming. Her father called the next evening, directly. I admired that. He did not waste time. "We believe in strategic positioning," he said smoothly, "especially before families integrate." "I agree," I replied. He paused slightly. "We want to ensure your son isn't carrying disproportionate responsibility." "Responsibility for what?" I asked. "For financial infrastructure," he said. Infrastructure. Such a polished word. "Tell me," I asked calmly, "what do you believe our infrastructure looks like?" He hesitated. "Smaller scale, perhaps more traditional." Traditional. Another polite downgrade. "Interesting," I said. There was a faint shift in his breathing. "Are we mistaken?" he asked. "Very," I replied. Silence. Then he laughed softly. "Well, that's good to hear." "Is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. Because assumptions are comfortable. Correction is not. Over the next week, invitations changed tone. Conversations grew more cautious. My daughter-in-law became quieter around me. Her mother stopped asking direct questions. Her father asked fewer strategic ones. They were recalibrating. Because when you discover the person you minimized may actually control more than you thought, you step carefully. The assumptions had done their damage, not to me, to their certainty, and certainty is what arrogance feeds on. By the end of the week, I understood something clearly. They were not mocking poverty, they were measuring power, and they had miscalculated. The problem with assumptions is not that they are rude, it is that they reveal how someone plans to treat you. They believed I was a decorative figure, a sentimental attachment, a modest background to elevate their story. They did not realize I owned the foundation, and foundations do not need approval. They hold everything up quietly until someone tests them. Power changes tone when paper enters the room. Up until that point, everything had been suggested. Polite conversations, carefully worded messages, strategic curiosity disguised as family bonding. But documents are different. Documents do not flirt, they commit. The first envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Courier, signature required. My son wasn't home. I signed for it. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, embossed with her father's firm logo. Subtle, professional, intimidating if you are meant to be intimidated. I sat at the kitchen table before opening it. No rush. When you understand leverage, you do not react quickly. You read. Inside was a draft agreement. Family Asset Alignment Proposal. Interesting choice of words. Not prenuptial agreement, not partnership terms, alignment. The document outlined proposed restructuring prior to marriage, joint property pooling, shared investment vehicles, future inheritance optimization, primary residence consolidation. Consolidation, that word again. Halfway down the second page, I found the sentence they hoped would go unnoticed. Primary family residence to be transferred into joint trust structure for long-term simplicity. Primary family residence, this house, transferred, joint, trust, long-term, simplicity. Every dangerous decision is wrapped in a word that sounds harmless. I continued reading. The trust would list my son and his future wife as primary controlling trustees. I would be listed as an advisory beneficiary. Advisory, meaning I could suggest, not decided. I leaned back slowly. There it was. Not mockery, not insults. Replacement. The plan was elegant. Position the small traditional mother as sentimental but not necessary. Transfer structural control under the banner of modernization. Frame it as efficiency, all without confrontation. I closed the folder. The door opened an hour later. My son walked in distracted. "Did something arrive?" he asked. "Yes," I said calmly, "it did." He saw the folder on the table. "You opened it?" he asked. "Of course," I replied. "It concerns my property." He sat down quickly and opened the document. As he read, his expression shifted. "That's not—" he started. "Not what?" I asked gently. "Not exactly what we discussed," he said. "What did you discuss?" I asked. He hesitated. "They said it would simplify future inheritance planning." "For whom?" I asked. "For all of us," he said. "All of us." I folded my hands. "And who holds this house now?" I asked. "You do," he replied. "And who is being asked to transfer it?" I continued. He looked down at the page. "You are," he said quietly. "Yes." Silence filled the room. He flipped to the signature page. There were placeholders for my name, already printed, already formatted. They had not asked if I would consider it. They had prepared for my compliance. That detail mattered more than the language. I stood and walked to the cabinet near the hallway. From the top shelf, I retrieved a thin black binder. I placed it in front of him. "Open that," I said. He did. Inside were copies of deeds, corporate filings, holding structures, long-term trust arrangements established years ago. His brow tightened. "Mom, what is this?" "The house you are sitting in is part of a broader holding company," I said calmly. "You never told me this." "You never asked," I replied. He turned more pages. There were properties he did not know about, investments he had assumed were modest savings, revenue streams he had never questioned. "You own all of this?" he asked quietly. "No," I said. "It owns itself. That's the difference." His breathing slowed. "This house cannot be transferred casually," I continued, "not without triggering tax events and structural consequences." He leaned back. "They don't know this." "No," I said, "they don't." And that is where their assumption failed. That evening she came over, not smiling, not defensive, focused. "We should go over the draft," she said, placing her bag down. "We already have," I replied. She froze slightly. My son handed her the binder. Her eyes moved quickly across the pages. The confidence drained first, then calculation replaced it. "This wasn't disclosed," she said. "It wasn't requested," I replied. She closed the folder carefully. "Why wasn't this mentioned before?" she asked. "Because I was not asked to surrender anything before," I replied. Her voice tightened. "This changes the structure of everything." "Yes," I said, "it does." She sat down slowly. "My father prepared this under the assumption that I was a sentimental widow with one modest asset," I finished. She did not respond. "The assumption was logical," she said carefully. "Logical is not factual," I replied. My son looked between us. "Why did you push for the house specifically?" he asked her. She hesitated. "It's stable collateral," she said. Collateral. There it was. Not family, not unity. Collateral. "For what?" he asked. "Expansion," she said. "Her father's projects, future investments. positioning. And if those projects failed? I asked. She did not answer, because she understood what that meant. Silence again, this time heavier. You were willing to risk my foundation to strengthen yours, I said calmly. That's not fair, she replied quickly. Fairness is irrelevant. The numbers are what matter. She looked at my son. You knew we needed leverage to grow, she said. He didn't answer immediately. I didn't know the leverage was her house, he said quietly. The air shifted, not hostile, exposed. I stood. I will not be signing this, I said. Her shoulders stiffened. Then we need to reconsider integration timelines, she replied. Integration. The word sounded smaller now. You should, I said. She gathered the papers. We were trying to build something bigger, she insisted. Bigger is not always stronger, I replied. Sometimes it is simply more fragile. She left shortly after. The door closed gently. My son stayed seated. I didn't realize they saw this place as a stepping stone, he said quietly. Most people do not reveal their intentions until paperwork is involved, I replied. He looked at me differently now, not as a small, quiet mother, as someone who had already built what they were trying to acquire. Why didn't you say anything at dinner? He asked. Because arrogance collapses faster when it believes itself secure, I said. The documents had done their work. They revealed their intentions. They revealed their strategy. They revealed that the mockery had not been about class. It had been about perceived weakness, and weakness is only attractive when it can be absorbed. By the end of that night, something irreversible had shifted. Not anger, not betrayal, clarity. They had come to dinner measuring value. They had prepared paperwork expecting surrender. Instead, they discovered structure, and structure is not easily moved. The documents did not humiliate them. They corrected them, quietly, permanently. The next morning felt different, not louder, not dramatic, just altered. There is a specific kind of silence that follows exposure. It is not avoidance, it is a recalculation. My son left early for work, but not before lingering in the kitchen doorway. He looked like someone who had woken up inside a different version of his life. Mom, he said carefully, did they always know this much about us? No, I replied. They knew what I allowed them to assume. He nodded slowly, and they assumed wrong. Yes. He didn't argue. That was new. The shift did not begin with confrontation. It began with posture. That evening, when she came back, she did not sit immediately. She stood near the table, scanning the room as if seeing it for the first time. Furniture she had dismissed as outdated. Art she had politely ignored. The walls she had already mentally restructured. Everything looked different when it was no longer available. We need to clarify expectations, she said. Her tone had changed. Gone was the subtle superiority. Gone was the careful condescension wrapped in civility. Now there was precision. What expectations? I asked. About financial transparency, she said. Transparency. An interesting request from someone who prepared transfer documents without full disclosure. Transparency works both ways, I replied. She met my eyes. I realize now we may have underestimated the scale of your holdings. May have. Underestimated. Scale. The vocabulary had shifted from personal to structural. I folded my hands. Underestimation is common when people assume history equals limitation. She did not smile. My father is concerned about liability exposure. Of course he is, I replied calmly. He assumed leverage. She inhaled slowly. We need to reconsider how this marriage integrates assets. Marriage does not require asset absorption, I said. It requires trust. She glanced toward my son. He was watching quietly, not defending, not aligning, listening. That was the real shift. He asked her something simple. Why was the house necessary? She hesitated just long enough. It wasn't necessary, she admitted. It was strategic. Strategic for whom? He asked. For long-term expansion. Expansion of what? He pressed. She did not answer immediately, because when strategy is exposed, motive follows. The air felt cleaner, less manipulated. I stood and walked toward the window. You see this house as capital, I said without turning. I see it as continuity. Continuity is emotional, she replied. No, continuity is structural. Emotional decisions are the ones that rush into consolidation. Silence again. But this silence was different. It was not me absorbing disrespect. It was her absorbing reality. Over the next week, small behaviors shifted. She stopped referring to the house as ours in conversation. She stopped suggesting renovations. She stopped framing my experience as outdated. When her father called, she stepped outside to take it, not because she wanted privacy, because she did not want him overhearing uncertainty. My son noticed. You used to talk freely in here, he said one night. She looked at him. Things are more complex than I thought, she replied. Complex. That word replaces dominance when dominance fails. He asked her something else. If she had known the full structure from the beginning, would she have approached things differently? She paused. Yes, she said. He nodded. That mattered more than she realized, because what he heard was this. Respect would have followed power, not character, not family. Power. The shift was not explosive, it was gravitational. The center of control moved, not to me, back to balance. Conversations became shorter, less strategic. Be more careful. Her parents did not invite me to dinner again. They invited my son alone. He declined. That was another shift, not rebellion, discernment. He began asking questions about their business model, about risk exposure, about why asset consolidation was urgent before marriage. The answers were layered, not illegal, but aggressive, growth-focused, leveraged. He started seeing patterns he had previously called ambition. Ambition is admirable. Predatory leverage is different. One afternoon, she approached me alone. Her tone was no longer superior. It was controlled by humility. I misread you, she said. No, I replied. You read me exactly how you wanted to. She didn't argue. I thought simplicity meant limited, she admitted. That is a common mistake, I said. She looked around again. You built all of this quietly. Yes. Why? She asked. Because wealth that announces itself attracts the wrong architects. She nodded slowly. That was the first honest moment we had shared. But honesty does not erase intention, it only reframes it. The shift completed itself when my son said something I had not expected. I don't want to merge anything until I understand everything, he told her. No more drafts, no more assumptions, no more urgency. Her reaction was controlled, but the impatience underneath it flickered. Delay weakens leverage, and she knew it. Days turned into weeks. Her father stopped sending documents. The alignment proposal vanished. The subtle pressure dissolved. The mockery never resurfaced because mockery requires perceived advantage, and that advantage was gone. The house felt different again, not tense, not defensive, balanced. I did not become louder. I did not assert dominance. I simply remained immovable. And when something does not move, the people pushing eventually step back. The shift was not about humiliation. It was about recalibration. They entered believing they could absorb. They stayed realizing they had miscalculated. Power does not always need to be displayed. Sometimes it only needs to be proven once. After that, the tone changes on its own. And in that change, you learn who valued you for who you are and who valued you for what they thought they could take. Exposure does not always happen in a courtroom. Sometimes it happens at a dinner table. 2 weeks after the documents were reviewed, her parents invited us over again. The tone of the invitation was different, less polished, more measured. My son looked at me before responding. "You don't have to come," he said. "I know," I replied, "but I will." When people miscalculate you, the most powerful thing you can do is remain visible. Their house looked the same as before: tall gates, polished floors, art chosen to impress rather than to mean anything. But this time I was not observing quietly. I was evaluating. We were seated at the same long dining table. Last time I was the simple mother. This time I was the unknown variable. Her father began politely. "We may have moved too quickly in discussing integration," he said. Integration. He avoided the word transfer. I nodded. "Quick decisions often hide long intentions," I replied. He smiled thinly. "Business requires foresight." "So does the family," I answered. The table grew still. Her mother attempted warmth. "We were only thinking about security for everyone involved." "Security for whom?" I asked gently. My son looked down at his plate. Her father stepped in again. "Asset consolidation protects the marriage." "Only when both parties understand the consolidation," I replied. He leaned back. "Are you implying deception?" I held his gaze. "I am implying an assumption. There is a difference." Silence. Then my son did something unexpected. He placed a folder on the table, not dramatically, deliberately. "I asked for clarity from my attorney," he said. The word attorney shifted the air. He opened a folder. It contained timelines, drafts, emails, suggested structures that had been forwarded to him before I ever saw them. He looked directly at his father. Why was my mother's house included in a draft before I even discussed it with her? No one answered immediately. Her father cleared his throat. "Preliminary exploration," he said. "Without consent?" my son asked. "Preliminary ideas are not binding." "But they reveal their intentions," I said quietly. Her mother shifted in her seat. "This feels accusatory." "Truth often does," I replied. My son continued. "Why was urgency emphasized repeatedly? Why were we told delay could weaken positioning? Positioning for what?" Her father's composure thinned. "Business requires timing. This is not a merger. This is a marriage." My son said, "This is not a merger. This is a marriage." Exposure does not require shouting. It requires documentation. My son slid a printed email across the table. In it, his father had written, Once assets are integrated, influence stabilizes. Influence stabilizes, not partnership strengthens. Influence stabilizes. Her father's face changed slightly. That was taken out of context, he said. Context does not erase wording, I replied. The room felt smaller now. Her mother looked at her daughter. You told us everything was transparent, she said quietly. She did not answer, because transparency had been selective. My son leaned back. I asked you directly if the house transfer was necessary, he said to his wife. You said it was standard. It is standard, she replied quickly. Standard where? He asked. Her father spoke again. In high net worth families. This is not about net worth, my son interrupted. It is about trust. The word hung there. Trust. Her father's tone hardened slightly. You are being emotional. No, my son said calmly. I am being informed. That was the moment the balance tipped fully. Exposure is not about humiliation. It is about removing narrative control. I spoke then. When you met me, you assumed I was naive, I said. Her mother's eyes flickered. You assumed my quiet meant limited, I continued. Her father did not interrupt. You mocked simplicity as weakness. You mistook restraint for incapacity. No one denied it, because denial would require revisiting that dinner, and everyone remembered it. My son looked at them both. Why did you laugh that night? He asked. Her mother's lips parted slightly. It was a harmless conversation. It was an evaluation, so I corrected it. Silence. Then something else surfaced. Fear. Not fear of me, fear of losing leverage. Her father attempted one final pivot. We only want what's best for our daughter. And what was best required to remove my mother? My son asked. No answer, because the exposure was complete, not of wealth, of motive. My son closed the folder. Nothing will be merged, he said. Nothing will be transferred, not until every assumption is examined. Her father looked at him steadily. You are making a mistake. Maybe, my son replied, but it will be my mistake. That sentence shifted everything. Authority had returned to its rightful place, not dominance, agency. We stood to leave. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just clarity. As we reached the doorway, her mother spoke softly. We misjudged you. I paused. No, I said. You revealed yourselves, and that is different. Outside, the night air felt clean. My son exhaled slowly. I should have seen it sooner, he said. People see what benefits them to see, I replied. He nodded. Thank you, he added quietly. For what? I asked. For not reacting the first night, for letting them expose themselves. Exposure is more powerful when it unfolds naturally, I said. He looked back at the house one last time. The lights were still bright, but something inside had dimmed. They had lost narrative control. They had lost assumed superiority. They had lost access. Exposure does not destroy people. It reveals them, and once revealed, dynamics change permanently. After exposure comes a strange quiet, not relief, not resolution, silence, the kind that settles after power shifts. The next few weeks were unusually calm. No invitations, no strategic calls disguised as check-ins, no subtle pressure wrapped in politeness. Her family went still. And when people who are used to steering conversations suddenly become quiet, it is never accidental. It means they are recalculating. My son noticed it too. They haven't called, he said one morning. I stirred my tea slowly. Silence can mean many things, I replied. It can mean retreat, it can mean reflection, or it can mean planning. He did not smile. He understood. The house felt different again, not tense, not watchful, grounded. For the first time since that first dinner, no one was discussing integration, no one was discussing timing, no one was discussing asset alignment, because they had learned something important. I was not movable. Her silence was more complex. She stayed in the marriage, but something between them had shifted. My son stopped repeating her language. He started questioning it. He stopped asking what I thought in order to relay it. He started asking what he should consider before deciding. That difference matters. One afternoon, he said something that told me the silence had worked. She said you manipulated that dinner, he told me. Did I? I asked calmly. She thinks you planned the exposure. I smiled faintly. Truth does not need choreography, I said. It only needs patience. He nodded slowly. He had begun to see something, that silence after revelation forces people to confront themselves, without noise, without distraction, just clarity. Her parents did eventually reach out, a brief message, professional in tone. We regret any misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, the word people use when intention has been uncovered. My son showed it to me. What do you think? He asked. I think regret without acknowledgement is a strategy, I replied. He did not respond, but he did not defend them either. The silence stretched longer. No new proposals, no revised drafts, no suggestions of partnership, because exposure changes appetite. They could no longer move aggressively, not without risking another spotlight. And people who value status fear the spotlight more than failure. At home, I noticed something inside myself, too. The urge to explain had faded. The urge to soften had quieted. I did not rehearse conversations anymore. I did not anticipate disrespect, because I had already proven something essential. Not that I was wealthy, not that I was powerful, that I was aware. Awareness is harder to manipulate than money. One evening, my daughter-in-law came alone. No announcement, no performance. She stood in the doorway much like she had the night of the first dinner, only this time she did not carry confidence like armor. We need to talk, she said. The same sentence, different tone. I invited her in. She sat carefully. There was no arrogance in her posture now, just calculation mixed with uncertainty. I did not expect you to handle it the way you did, she said. Handle what? I asked. The dinner, the documents, the questions. You assumed I would react emotionally, I said. She did not deny it. I thought you would feel embarrassed, she admitted. I did not feel embarrassed, I replied. I felt informed. Silence again. Quieter this time, less defensive. Why didn't you say anything that first night? She asked. Because people reveal more when they think they are safe, I said. She looked down. My parents misjudged you. No, I said gently. They evaluated me. They just did it incorrectly. She absorbed that. The silence between us was no longer hostile. It was instructive. She understood now that the dynamic she assumed no longer existed, not because I fought, because I waited. Waiting can be powerful when you are not afraid of what you already know. She left that evening without promises, without confrontation, just subdued. The silence after that conversation felt different, not strategic, reflective. My son began spending more time asking about my history, about how I built what I built, about decisions I made when no one was watching. He had never asked those questions before because he had never needed to. Now he did. Silence has a way of exposing gaps, and once gaps are seen, they cannot be unseen. Weeks passed. No one mentioned transfers again. No one mentioned merging. The assumption that wealth determines hierarchy had dissolved because it had been confronted quietly. The most interesting part of silence is this: it forces everyone to sit with their own interpretation of events. Her parents had to consider how their words looked in hindsight. She had to reconsider how she positioned herself. My son had to examine where he placed loyalty. And I simply observed, not with suspicion, with clarity. Silence does not mean peace, it means recalibration. And in that recalibration, people reveal who they truly are when they are no longer in control. I realized something important during that stretch of quiet. The exposure is loud at the moment, but silence is what cements change. Because without constant defense, truth settles. And once truth settles, behavior adjusts. The house felt like mine again, not because anyone declared it, because no one questioned it. Authority returned not through dominance, through steadiness. That was the silence, not emptiness, stability, the kind that arrives when manipulation fails and nothing is left to negotiate. And stability is far more powerful than any lottery win. Reclaiming does not begin with an announcement. It begins with a decision you make quietly, long before anyone notices the shift. The morning after her visit, I awoke before sunrise. The house was still. No tension, no expectation, no anticipation of someone else's agenda. For months I had felt watched in subtle ways, evaluated, measured against assumptions I never agreed to. That morning I felt something different: ownership, not of assets, of position. I walked through the house slowly, touching the back of a chair, the edge of the counter, the frame of the hallway mirror. I did not need to prove anything anymore, because I had already proven the only thing that mattered. I was not what they assumed, and I never had been. Reclaiming is not about humiliation, it is about alignment. I did not cut my son off, I did not freeze her out, I did not escalate. I clarified. The paperwork was updated formally, access levels adjusted, titles confirmed, protections reinforced, not because I feared another attempt, because clarity prevents repetition. My son sat with me one evening and asked a question he had never asked before. "Why didn't you tell us earlier how much you owned?" I looked at him carefully. "Because people treat you differently when they know," I said, "and I wanted to see who you were before money entered the conversation." He absorbed that. It was not an accusation. It was true. He nodded slowly. "I should have defended you at dinner," he said. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "You needed to see it for yourself. Defense without awareness does not last. Understanding does." That was the difference now. He understood. And understanding creates loyalty that fear never can. Her behavior shifted too, subtly. She asked more questions. She assumed less. Her parents stopped evaluating and started observing. They invited me again weeks later. Different tone, different posture. No references to background, no references to simplicity. Just respect. But I noticed something important. I no longer needed their approval, because reclaiming had not been about them. It had been about me refusing to shrink in rooms where I was misread. I began speaking differently too, more directly, less cushioning. When something felt off, I said it. When something needed clarity, I asked for it, without apology. And the world did not collapse. In fact, it adjusted. That is the secret most people never test. The fear of asserting yourself is usually larger than the consequence. Power does not need to be loud, it needs to be stable. I thought back to that first dinner, the subtle smirks, the coded remarks, the underestimation. If I had reacted emotionally, I would have confirmed their narrative. If I had withdrawn, I would have confirmed their hierarchy. Instead, I waited, I observed, I revealed, and that changed everything. Reclaiming is not revenge, it is repositioning. I did not move above them, I simply returned to where I already stood. There is a difference. One afternoon, months later, my daughter-in-law said something quietly while we were alone in the kitchen. "I misjudged you," she admitted. I smiled faintly. "You evaluated me based on presentation," I said. She nodded. "I thought simplicity meant smallness." "It doesn't," I replied. Silence followed, but this time it was comfortable, not strategic, not calculating, just understanding. My son began asking about investment structures, about long-term planning, about discipline, not because he wanted access, because he wanted knowledge. That mattered. The hierarchy had dissolved. What remained was a relationship, and a relationship is healthier when it is not built on assumptions. The house feels different now, not because anything material changed, because the air is clear. No one is testing me. No one is managing me. No one is trying to reposition me quietly. They know I see. And when people know you see clearly, they move differently. If you are listening to this and something feels familiar, hear this carefully. Being underestimated is not a weakness, it is leverage. Let people reveal their assumptions. Let them speak freely. Let them believe they understand you. Then choose when to clarify. Reclaiming is not about shocking others. It is about stabilizing yourself. You do not need to prove wealth. You do not need to announce strength. You do not need to dominate rooms. You need to remain aware. And when necessary, you need to reveal the truth calmly. That dinner was never about money. It was about hierarchy. And hierarchy dissolves when information replaces assumption. I did not become harder. I became precise. I did not become colder. I became clear. And clarity changes how people approach you for the rest of your life. Thank you for staying with my story. If it resonated, you already understand something important. Quiet strength does not beg for recognition. It waits. And when it speaks, it does not need to raise its voice. It only needs to be accurate.